Nepal, the small Himalayan country, is the same size as the state of Florida in the US, or the country of Greece. Nepal is synonymous with big mountains, as the Himalayas dominate the country with 8 of the world's highest 10 mountains in the world here. Everyone has heard of Mount Everest. At over 29,000 feet, it is the highest and most famous mountain on Earth. While 30,000 to 40,000 people trek to Everest Basecamp every year, only a tiny fraction of these trekkers do the much more beautiful and more challenging Three Passes route. The Three Passes route takes trekkers not only to Everest Basecamp, but also up and over the 3 highest passes in the Khumbu region. Kongma La, Cho La, and Renjo La are all high elevation passes above 17,500 feet, or over 5,300 meters high. This spring, Cece and I set out on our own with no guide and no porter to tackle arguably the most spectacular route in the amazing nation of Nepal. The adventure started with a few days in Kathmandu, adjusting to the time change, getting our permits and loading up on snacks for our trek. Kathmandu to Lukla flights get canceled all the time, and unfortunately we spent 2 unsuccessful mornings at the Kathmandu airport, only to be advised that cloudy weather in Lukla would push our flight back yet another day. Finally, we were able to fly out on day 3, and I snagged a seat next to the pilots on the tiny 14-seater plane. We were so relieved not to have to go back to book another night to stay in Kathmandu. The plane took off, leaving the hazy valley of Kathmandu behind us as we flew on a short 30-minute flight up to the infamous town of Lukla. During the flight, on our left-hand side, we stared eye to eye with many of the biggest mountains in the world. The little plane started descending quickly, and before we knew it, we were landing at the Tenzing Hillary Airport, often known as the most dangerous airport in the world, due to the tiny landing strip of only 500 meters set at a steep 12% grade. We successfully landed. We were glad to, although 2 days behind schedule, have finally gotten to Lukla. Unfortunately, they forgot to put our bags on the flight, so we had to wait for a couple more hours for the last SITA flight of the morning that thankfully had our backpacks on it.
Finally, we're underway.
The first mile of the trek took us through Lukla, where at 9,300 feet, we were already higher than nearly every town in the United States. Lukla is the starting and finishing point for everyone entering this region by plane, and it has lots of shops to load up on final things before truly hitting the trail. Once we left Lukla, we were back. We were back to the Nepali trail life, which is one of the most unique travel experiences on Earth. We passed large piles of rocks with Tibetan scriptures carved in them, and colorful prayer wheels. There were stray dogs napping and walking along the trail, and cows wandering wherever they pleased. High season was coming soon, so donkey trains were heading up and down the trail to Namche Bazaar to take up food, fuel, and gear for guest houses and the climbing teams. We were back in the land of prayer flags. The prayer flags have 5 colors: blue for sky, white for clouds, red for fire, green for water, and yellow for the earth, designed with sacred symbols and mantras on them to bless the surrounding landscape and the people living there and passing through. After a couple of hours walking, it was time for a quick lunch of whatever was ready at the local guest house, which happened to be noodle soup and the Nepali classic of dal bhat, which is a combo of lentil soup, dal, and steamed rice, bhat, and is often served with various side dishes like curry or pickles. After a quick lunch, we were back on the trail, eager to get more miles in so we could make up for the time we lost this morning, waiting for our backpacks. The farther we made it up today, the shorter we would have tomorrow to make it up to the famous town of Namche Bazaar, set at 11,200 feet.
Hello. Hello.
The trail passes through many villages like Phakding, Tok Tok, and Benkar, as we navigate our way past a bunch more donkey trains before making it up to Monjo, where we would spend night 1. We busted out our 1 kilogram peanut butter and honey that we brought and lathered it on our pancakes in the morning before hitting the trail towards Namche Bazaar.
Nice night at Monjo last night. Here we are starting day 2.
We officially entered Sagarmatha National Park, one of the permits that we had to get, and crossed several long suspension bridges, which are a theme of Nepali treks. Porters were all over the trails. Nepali porters are famous for being ridiculously strong, carrying loads of up to 100 kilograms or 220 pounds, using a head strap to help balance their loads. The last couple of miles up to Namche head straight uphill from the river, gaining about 2,000 feet, making it one of the steeper climbs in the early part of the trek. We ran into a couple of friends from our flight, and we hiked the last mile or so with them until we came into the infamous village of Namche Bazaar, which is a major hub in the Everest region. Knowing that we would have fairly limited tea house menus coming up, we jumped at the opportunity to grab some Japanese food for lunch. Some gyoza, ramen, and tempura hit the spot for a tasty lunch.
Good?
We found a guest house, dropped off our bags, and then I headed out to explore the local monastery and some of the quieter trails in Namche in the afternoon. Many people do an acclimatization day in Namche, but we wanted to continue up the trail a bit the following morning. Even though the afternoon clouds were moving in, it was fun to explore the corners of this famous town. Dinner was a yak burger and fries for me and some soup for Cece, and we got to bed early, as when it gets dark above 11,000 feet, it gets cold quickly out here.
Not a bad view to wake up to this morning here in Namche Bazaar.
Day 3, and we were off through the streets of Namche Bazaar heading uphill out of town. It was a beautiful blue sky morning, which gave us great views of the surrounding area and big peaks. Many people stay in Namche for 2 nights and head up to the Hotel Everest View for a day hike. But we were continuing on up the trail to get some more miles under our belts without gaining elevation too quickly. We made our way up the rolling trail past more prayer flags and stupas. Another day on the trail meant loads more donkeys to avoid, as the resupply animals of the Himalayas were out in full force again today. We passed by little villages and multiple giant suspension bridges as we made our way up towards Tengboche. The higher we climbed, the more the donkeys got replaced with yaks, whose thick double-layered fur make them well suited for transporting goods at higher altitudes with colder temperatures.
Tengboche.
Yeah, right here. Thank you. Thank you. In Tengboche, we found a guest house with a kitchen already serving food and grabbed a carb-filled lunch of fried noodles and soup. After lunch, we hiked by the big monastery in town and made our way up another mile or so on the trail to the little village of Deboche, where we found the Himalayan Culture guest house that had nobody staying there and a sweet young man managing it. We got a hot shower and came out to the dining room, where the guest manager lit up the fire with yak dung as fuel to help us keep warm.
Our village is not good school. My son read in private school.
We had a nice dinner together with momos and spaghetti.
Is it good? That's warm.
Day 4, and we were up at 6 a.m. again to have our muesli and porridge breakfast.
Ooh, fresh snow here on the start of day 4.
It was a clear, crisp morning as a 2-inch layer of snow covered the Himalayan landscape. Today we would gain another 2,000 feet in elevation, climbing from 12,000 to 14,000 feet. Thankfully, after an hour, the sun came out from behind the mountains and warmed us up as we cruised uphill past stupas and Tibetan stones placed in the middle of the trail. We kept climbing all morning, making our way up past giant teams of yaks whose bells could be heard from nearly a mile away. We made our way up with Ama Dablam right beside us, and we knew we were getting closer to many of the bigger mountains in the world. While the trail generally heads uphill on the way out on the Three Passes Loop, there are always big downhill sections where we lost elevation as we climbed down to another riverbed or bridge to cross. Often Cece and I would prefer to hike all morning from about 7 to 1 if we could get somewhere for a late lunch and have the whole afternoon to relax. We powered up one more solid uphill above the river before we walked into the village of Dingboche, where we would spend the night. We grabbed some noodles and rice for lunch and found another guest house, and I headed out to check out the village. Dingboche has some beautiful large stupas set up on the hills right next to town. And in the evening, we stayed warm by the fire and had some more momos and spaghetti to get some good calories in. Day 5. Today we woke up well before sunrise to get up to Chukung and have the chance to climb Chukung Ri before any afternoon weather moved in. In the frigid early morning, we made our way up the trail with our headlamps. The sunrise was a huge relief as it warmed us up after a super cold first hour out. Cece wanted to rest in the Chukung guest house a bit to be ready for our pass day, so I checked us in and then headed up to hopefully summit Chukung Ri, which is an optional extra hike on the Three Passes Loop that many hikers choose to add on. The Chukung Ri trail is straight up, gaining 2,500 feet in 1.7 miles.
Breathing is tough. This is steep.
Finally, I got up to the prayer flag covered ridge and could see the scramble ahead of me to the high point.
I'm up at 17,600 feet. I made it to the ridge.
After a solid scramble for the last quarter mile, I arrived at the summit with a 360-degree view of the peaks all around me.
Summit of Chukung Ri. Woo! Yes! Woo-hoo-hoo!
This is one of the highest elevations I'd ever been at, and it was a perfect snack spot to soak in the warm sun and stunning views. After a good break up top, it was time to first scramble, then hike, then trail run down the steep downhill descent all the way back to Chukung. Cece and I got lunch and relaxed in the afternoon before our dinner with two of our go-tos, momos and spaghetti, once again. Tomorrow would be the biggest and most difficult pass of the three-pass loop. We left Chukung right after sunrise, as today would be the most difficult day of the entire three-pass trek. At 18,200 feet, Kongmala Pass would be easily the highest elevation that Cece had ever been to. The trail climbed steadily out of Chukung, and we kept up a consistent pace, trying not to take too many breaks to keep our momentum going, as we knew it would be a long, full day. After a good 3 hours of non-stop hiking, we were up above 17,000 feet with our full packs, kind of wishing we had a guide or porter to carry some of our stuff, like many of the other trekkers we saw out there. The incline of the trail got even steeper, and we chose a pace which allowed us to breathe in the thin air as we got to the last mile up to Kongmala Pass. As we made our way up through the rugged terrain, some of the world's biggest mountains started coming into view. Nuptse, Lhotse, and Everest were just off to the north, a couple of miles away. We came around the corner and hiked along a beautiful frozen lake. The last half mile up to the pass is straight up, which at this altitude makes it definitely a challenging finish to get up. Finally, the Tibetan prayer flags waving in the wind came into view as we could see the pass up ahead. We scrambled up the last few steps up, and the views of Kongmala Pass were incredible.
Woohoo! Kongmala Pass!
Kicking back. I've earned it.
We walked around and found a spot to tuck in out of the wind and enjoy the surprisingly nice weather at 18,200 feet. We had worked so hard to get up to this point, we wanted to stay up top and take in the views. We stayed long enough that we could cheer on the next trekker coming up the pass.
Woohoo! Made it! Well done.
That wasn't the least bit frightening.
Oh, nicely done.
And after about a half an hour, unfortunately, we had to get a move on, as we still had a bunch more miles ahead of us to the village of Lobuche. It was a steep and rocky descent, getting down from the pass, and it wasn't fast. The last mile or two makes its way through the bottom of the Khumbu Glacier, which is some ice and loads of boulder fields, before finally getting into Lobuche. It was now 3 p.m., and we've been hiking since 6 a.m. Lobuche and Gorik Shep get more crowded as we rejoin the Everest Basecamp route, but thankfully we found a place to stay at the Oxygen Guest House, where we were glad to get checked in and get some real food after a solid pass day. And having a room with a window looking out directly at Mount Everest is not a bad deal. Sleeping at over 16,000 feet is not easy. We woke up many times throughout the night, as the oxygen level is definitely different up here. The next day, we would get up to hike the trail to Gork Shep, the final village on the way up to Everest Base Camp. There were definitely more people out on the trail as we were overlapping with the Everest Basecamp trek, where all the Everest trekkers get bottlenecked with only a few places to stay. The trail rolls through rocky boulder fields and empties out into the tiny outpost of Gork Shep and nearly 17,000 feet high. Gork Shep is set in a sandbox and looks very remote, as it is the last little village before the seasonal outpost that is Everest Base Camp in the late spring. We made our way to a nice lookout peering down on the Khumbu Icefall so we could look down on the Everest Base Camp area that would be expanding probably 100 times over in the next month as climbers make their way up to prepare for Everest.
We are looking straight down on Everest Base Camp with the Khumbu Icefall behind us and the tallest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, straight back behind us.
We hiked back down the ridge to Gork Shep, where we had decided not to stay, but rather to stay in Lobuche another night, as we heard that accommodation is extremely basic in Gork Shep, and sleeping at nearly 17,000 feet would be even harder. We passed more porters carrying tables that would be used at Everest Base Camp in the upcoming months, as we made our way back to a guest house in Gork Shep for lunch with a sweet woman running the place.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
From Gork Shep, it was a few more miles back down the trail to Lobuche. We relaxed in the afternoon at Lobuche and Cici played her ukulele. We played a bunch of card games with some other trekkers, and it was fun to forget about the elevation and cold for a bit, while we played some cards and had some good laughs. Unfortunately, Cici got ill and needed a rest, so we ended up staying in Lobuche for a total of 3 nights, as we needed to get her feeling better before moving on. While taking care of Cici all day, I got out for an hour or so to hike up to a nearby ridge in the late afternoon, which had nice views looking right across to Mount Everest. It was fun to be at 17,000 feet and running along the beautiful ridge with views of the biggest mountains in the world.
Mount Everest, the world's tallest mountain, is right back behind me there.
The next morning, Cici was feeling a tiny bit better and was willing to give it a try to get over to Zongla village, which would be a shorter but no less beautiful of a day. I grabbed her backpack to lighten her load, as she was still not feeling too great. After a mile, we split with the standard Everest Base Camp route and got back on the less busy 3 Passes route. As we continued on, fantastic views of 21,000-foot Cholatse and Taboche peaks appeared right ahead of us. The combo of these partially snow-covered peaks and the frozen Cholotso below us made the last couple of miles into Zongla particularly pretty. We climbed a few hundred feet on the last hill into town, and we found a place to stay at the Sherpa guest house with a sweet local family.
Thank you.
We grabbed spaghetti and Tibetan bread for lunch in the afternoon, and I walked around the tiny village for a bit, before the sun dipped below the giant ridge. Once the sun gets behind the ridge, it was back to the dining room to warm up by the stove, share hot drinks, and have some dalbat for dinner.
Thank you.
Before getting under the covers, as the temperatures quickly dropped below freezing in our room, once again here at 15,800 feet. The next day was a pass day, so we were up early to have breakfast at 6 a.m. and to get out the door by 6:30. It was a frigid but clear morning as we started making our way up the Chola Pass, which at 17,700 feet high would be another big day for us. After an easy first mile, the incline cranks up on the trail as we made our way up towards 17,000 feet. Thankfully, the trail is well marked, and there were a few other groups who started before us who all had guides that we could see on the trail, which is comforting to know that you are on the best route. For not feeling too great the past couple of days, Cici was moving pretty well today, and we were passing nearly everyone we saw on the trail. Once we got up to the last mile to the pass, we came up upon a glacier we'd heard about, and the reason we had bought and carried spikes for traction this entire route. We threw on our spikes and hopped onto the glacier to test out our $5 Kathmandu spikes. They worked well, and with our trekking poles and spikes, we were able to feel safe on the mix of crunchy ice and snow. It was fun digging in and making our way up the glacier. Cece and I have used spikes a lot at home, so it felt good, and we could see the pass getting closer and closer straight ahead of us.
We bought these orange little spikes back in Kathmandu a couple weeks ago. We're getting to use them here, and they are very helpful making our way up to Chola Pass.
It was a fun 20 or 30 minutes or so until we could put the spikes away and head up the final 10 minutes, straight up the rocky trail to Chola Pass. Finally, we made it up to the welcoming prayer flags marking the arrival at the second pass of the Three Passes Loop.
Yeah! Chola Pass!
Amazingly, there was a charging station at the top, which I've never seen at a pass this remote. After getting blown around for about 10 minutes by the gusts of wind, we dropped down on the far side of the pass, which is a steep, rocky descent. We were really glad we did the Three Passes route counterclockwise, as the climbs going the opposite direction looked even more challenging. After another mile, the trail mellowed out a bit. We found a giant boulder to tuck behind and have some of our peanut butter and jelly chapati sandwiches, which we had made earlier this morning.
Chapati, peanut butter and jelly.
The trail then rolls on and makes its way up to a 16,800-foot little ridge with prayer flags, and then drops sharply down to 15,300 feet to the village of Dragnag, also known as Tangnak,
Namaste. Hello, hello.
where we found a place to stay for the night. Our guest house had a nice little sunroom to hang out in, and we enjoyed some fried momos for a snack and soup and spaghetti for dinner. It was another frigid night sleeping above 15,000 feet, which, although still not comfortable, was getting to be the norm for us now. Today would be a shorter day to get over to one of the most famous villages on the Three Passes trek, Gokyo. The Gokyo Lakes trek is another alternative to the Everest Basecamp trek. It is a bit easier than the Three Passes Loop, as it is a little shorter and has less climbing. This morning we would navigate our way through the bottom part of a huge glacial valley that in the spring has large patches of ice, but has big sandy and rocky sections that go up and down. The trail would stop and start in places, and it was like a maze picking out the best route across the rugged terrain.
It's part glacier, part boulders, part sand and sediment, and it just rolls up and down, up and down. It's kind of like a maze trying to find your way out here. It's interesting terrain, but definitely not fast.
After an hour or so making our way across, we came up to the final sandy uphill, which would get us out of this maze. We took turns with a couple groups who were coming down to make sure that we didn't throw rocks down on each other, as it was a steep climb up.
Good work, good work.
We crested the ridge, and before we knew it, we came around the corner to be greeted by the spectacular views coming into the village of Gokyo. Now we could see why Gokyo is one of the highlights in the Everest region. We made our way down into the village, and we visited several guest houses like usual.
Namaste, hello, hello.
And found a spot to stay at Namaste Lodge, where we dropped off our things and had lunch together.
Wow, that's nice, huh?
I was eager to get out and see some more of the Gokyo Lakes in the afternoon, so I got a day pack together and headed out up the trail towards the 4th and 5th Gokyo Lakes. I got up near the frozen 4th lake on my left-hand side and continued in the hot afternoon sun to the 5th lake, which would give a different perspective of Mount Everest and the area below Choyu Base Camp.
I've come up to the 5th of the Gokyo Lakes, and Mount Everest is straight across about 10 miles. Different perspective looking at it here from the opposite side, all the way across all the glacier and sediment.
I hiked over to the mostly frozen 5th lake, which in mid-spring was just starting to defrost around the edges of the lake.
Woohoo! Made it to the 5th of the Gokyo Lakes.
It was still mid-afternoon, and I had enough time to get back near the village of Gokyo and go for another 2,000 feet of climbing over about 1 mile that would hopefully get me up to the summit of Gokyo Ridge before the sunset for some great views overlooking the entire Gokyo area. This trail literally goes straight uphill at a 30 to 40% incline and is a real leg burner. As I climbed straight up, I got a beautiful perspective of the main Gokyo Lake straight down below, along with the attached village of Gokyo.
I've gained about 1,500 feet in 3/4 of a mile, which means I should have about a half mile and 500 more feet of climbing to go. I'm right about 17,000 feet. Looking forward to getting to the summit of Gokyo-ri. Woohoo! Summit of Gokyo-ri. It is almost 4:30, so I got up here in just a little bit less than an hour. That was a good push from the lake up 2,000 feet, 1 mile.
It was perfect timing, and thankfully it wasn't a cloudy afternoon, as I could see for miles around. I grabbed a snack and threw on some layers, as I wanted to enjoy these views for a few minutes, and when you stop, you quickly realize that it is still way below freezing on the summit. About 10 minutes later, a group of Germans made it up with their guide in the late afternoon, as it was the ideal time to be on the summit. The sun was moving down quickly towards the ridge off to the west, and I knew that as soon as the sun got behind the ridge, temps would get really cold. So after a few more minutes of enjoying the fantastic views, it was time to quickly hike down the summit, dropping 2,000 feet back down to the shores of Gokyo Lake, and get down for a baby wipe shower and to join Cece for dinner at our guest house.
Woohoo! Back down along the lake.
Our Gokyo guest house had a bigger menu than many of our guest houses, so I opted for the Yak Sizzler plate, which hit the spot after a full day of seeing the highlights around Gokyo. The next day was our final pass day, so once again we were up at 6 a.m. to make sure we could hit the trail by 6:30. Today's challenge would be getting up and over Renjola Pass, which at 17,500 feet would be the final of the 3 high-altitude passes that gives the Three Passes trek its name. It was another chilly morning, as every morning is when you sleep above 15,000 feet, and we were glad to quickly get into the sun as we started making our way around the main Gokyo Lake. Once we passed the lake, the trail started climbing, switchbacking its way up to 16,000 feet. We navigated our way up a rocky valley that led straight towards the steep final ascent of Renjola Pass. After 10 days on the trek, we were both acclimatized, and this pass, while not easy, was definitely the one we got up the fastest of the 3 big passes.
We are up above 17,400 feet. We should have a couple hundred more feet to climb up to the last of the 3 passes, Renjola.
And before we knew it, we were surrounded by prayer flags once again, and we smiled as we knew we had arrived at the last big pass of the loop.
Woo! Renjola!
The views from the pass were tremendous, and we can honestly say that the 3 Pass Loop has so many more big-time views than what we saw on the standard Everest Basecamp route. We stayed at Renjola Pass for a few minutes before the bitter cold of the morning started getting to us. We hoped to make it down to at least Marulung, so we knew we still had a long ways to go. We cruised down the backside of the pass, which was surprisingly a well-built-out staircase of a trail. It took us down into the shadows, and the cold made us pick up our pace, as we could see the sun hitting the trail farther down below. Once we got down another 1,000 feet or so out of the wind, we stopped for our chapati lunch break.
Another peanut butter and jelly chapati for our pass day.
Who wants food?
So do I.
After lunch, it was miles and miles of downhill. The views were great, as countless 20 to 23,000 foot peaks surrounded us on all sides. We were really glad once again that we had done this trek counterclockwise, as there aren't nearly as many villages to stop at on this west side of the loop, and going up the east side first allowed us many more villages to choose from to stay as we acclimatized while doing the first few days of our route. We kept up a good pace for the next couple of hours until we made it down to Marulung for some fried noodles and soup to fill our bellies. After lunch, it was a few more miles where we actually needed to ask a couple of locals to make sure we took the most direct route to get down to the village of Tahoe. Finally, after crossing some more bridges and losing 5,000 feet in elevation since the pass, we entered Tahoe and we found a place to stay with a sweet local family at Hotel Yak.
Thank you.
At 13 or 14 miles and going up and over the final pass, it had been our longest mileage day of the trek, and we were glad to have a place to stay and get some all-you-can-eat dalbat for dinner. The next morning, we downed our French toast and pancakes and got out on the trail. The mornings had been consistently sunny, basically the entire trek, and today was no exception. We worked our way through the pretty village of Tahoe and had a dog or two join us for a bit. Today would be the day we would get ourselves at least back to Namche Bazaar, completing the entire west side of the Three Passes Loop. We moved along quickly in the morning, crossing more bridges as the trail rolled along. and we cruised through picturesque little villages like Samdo and Tamo, which were well decorated with our favorite stupas with eyes, along with plenty of prayer flags and prayer wheels. After a couple more hours, we were getting down to Namche. We were excited to get back to the Japanese place we had eaten at what felt like ages ago. However, it was only about 10 days before. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. After a much appreciated non-trekking guest house lunch of Japanese food, we were back on the trail to get down at least a couple more miles this afternoon on our second to last day trekking. The skies closed up and it started snowing, which had no effect on the countless donkey trains which were out en masse as high season in the Everest area was fast approaching. Literally every 5 to 10 minutes we would be avoiding another donkey train, which was significantly slowing us down on our descent from Namche. We kept moving down, knowing that the following day we needed to be in Lukla, not too late to be able to confirm that we were there with Sea Air for our flight the day after to keep our 2 tickets on our tiny plane back to Kathmandu. We made it all the way past Monjo, where we had stayed on our first night, and found a place in the village of Benkar. We had some tasty popcorn, momos, hash browns, and were joined by another Nepali family who was going back up to their guest house with their little puppy with them. The last day, at least we hoped so, as long as our flight wasn't canceled tomorrow. Today we had a doable 7-ish miles to get down to Lukla, and supposedly at 1 p.m. we could visit the airline office to confirm our presence for the next day's flight. We cruised through the villages this morning, as there are a lot of them, on this first, or for us, last stretch of the trail going down to Lukla. We came down through Fakding, Chutawa, and Thadoski. We were getting closer and closer to the finish, and we knew we could make it to Lukla before lunch. Donkeys, horses, and dogs were our constant companions as we clicked off the miles that were bringing us closer and closer to our final destination.
We have less than 1 mile left until we get back into Lukla.
Finally, we made it into the streets of Lukla and up to the airport, where planes were landing and taking off constantly, as the high season sees around 50 flights per day landing on this tiny landing strip at over 9,000 feet. So we grabbed some lunch and checked into the Nest Hotel, which is literally right next to the landing strip, to make life easier on ourselves and to be able to watch the actions at the infamous world's most dangerous airport. Yak steak, yeah? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Despite losing 2 days to flight cancellations at the beginning and 1 day to Cece feeling sick, we completed the trek 3 days faster than we initially predicted, and only 13 days of hiking. The final morning we had our breakfast and only had to walk right out the front door to get to the airport, where our flight took off 30 minutes early because everyone was there and the pilots were ready to go. It was a quick half-an-hour flight, and before we knew it, we were coming down into the haze of Kathmandu. We had made it. The 3 passes Everest Basecamp Loop. It had not been easy, as we had faced altitude, countless frigid nights above 15,000 feet, illness, avoiding thousands of yaks and donkeys, and guiding ourselves independently through the rugged Khumbu region in the shadows of Everest. The 3 Passes Loop is definitely one of the most challenging tea house treks that Nepal has to offer. Going over 3 17,000 plus foot passes is not easy. However, the increased difficulty of this trek comes with its rewards of stunning scenery and fewer crowds. While the Everest Basecamp trek, along with the Annapurna circuit, are clearly Nepal's most popular treks, we were glad that we had chose to do the 3 Passes Loop in March to avoid the people that flood the Everest Basecamp region in April and May. The 3 Passes, while not for your average hiker, is an incredibly scenic route that I would recommend to any active outdoor lover who wants to see the beauty of the Himalayas while being surrounded by the biggest mountains on Earth, and while experiencing the kindness of the local Nepali people.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, right here. Thank you.